What would you do if you found a homeless pregnant woman collapsing in the snow outside your door? Most people would call for help and walk away. But one lonely elderly woman made a decision that changed 2 lives forever. What she discovered in the months that followed uncovered a heartbreaking secret buried for over 40 years, a truth so powerful it brought an entire town to tears. Stay with us until the very end, because the final act of love will remind you that one moment of kindness can rewrite a destiny, and you won't want to miss it. In the heart of a relentless winter, where icy winds swept across the mountains and fresh snow buried everything in sight, 73-year-old Eleanor Whitmore stepped onto the porch of her small cabin, pulling her faded wool shawl tightly around her shoulders. After spending decades alone, she had learned to read every warning nature offered. The silence among the towering pines, the bitter sting in the air, and the heavy gray sky all told her another fierce storm had arrived. Yet that morning, something felt different. As Eleanor glanced toward the mailbox at the end of her snow-covered driveway, she noticed what looked like a dark mound, half hidden beneath the drifting snow. At first, she assumed it was nothing more than a fallen tree limb carried by the storm. But the longer she looked, the more certain she became that it wasn't an object at all. It was a person. Her heart pounded as she hurried through the knee-deep snow, each step slower than she wanted but faster than her aging body should have allowed. When she finally reached the figure, she froze. A young woman lay curled into herself, almost completely buried beneath the snow. Her face was deathly pale. Her lips had turned a frightening shade of blue, and every breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. Eleanor quickly reached for her neck, praying she would find a pulse. There it was. Weak, fragile, but still alive. Then Eleanor noticed something that made the urgency even greater. The young woman was heavily pregnant. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. 2 lives were fading away before her eyes. Without allowing herself another second to think, Eleanor slipped one arm beneath the stranger's shoulders and the other beneath her legs. Every muscle in her body protested as she struggled through the deep snow, determined to reach the warmth of her cabin before it was too late. When she finally pushed open the front door, the heat from the wood stove rushed over them. Eleanor carefully laid the unconscious woman on the old sofa, removed her soaked clothing, dressed her in warm flannel pajamas, wrapped her in thick blankets, and gently covered her with the heavy military coat that had once belonged to her late husband, a keepsake she had guarded for years because it was the last piece of him she had left. As warmth slowly returned to the young woman's frozen body, something inside Eleanor awakened as well. Skills she hadn't used in more than 4 decades came back without hesitation. Her hands moved with calm precision as she checked the woman's breathing, watched for signs of frostbite, and carefully felt the baby's movements beneath her swollen belly. The years she had once spent caring for mothers and newborns suddenly felt as though they had never ended. While a pot of warm chicken broth simmered on the stove, Eleanor quietly studied the stranger. Her clothes were worn but clean. Her hand suggested she hadn't been living on the streets for long. Whatever tragedy had driven her into a mountain blizzard had happened recently, and it had left her with nowhere else to turn. Moments later, the young woman's eyes slowly fluttered open. Fear instantly replaced confusion. I have to go," she whispered, struggling to sit up while instinctively protecting her unborn child. Eleanor gently raised a hand. "Easy now, you're safe. The storm outside isn't showing any mercy, and neither you nor that baby are going anywhere until I know you're both going to survive." The young woman looked around the cozy cabin before lowering her eyes. "I don't have any money." A gentle smile appeared on Eleanor's weathered face. "Did I ever ask you for any—" The stranger said nothing. She simply accepted the warm bowl of broth placed into her trembling hands. Neither woman could have imagined that this single act of compassion, born in the middle of a deadly snowstorm, would become the beginning of a story powerful enough to heal decades of regret, restore broken lives, and prove that one person's kindness can change generations forever. The fire crackled softly inside the cabin, while the storm raged outside, rattling the windows with icy gusts that seemed determined to force their way in. Snow continued to pile against the porch, burying the narrow trail Eleanor had carved only moments earlier. Anyone caught outside now wouldn't survive for long. Eleanor placed another log onto the fire before carrying a steaming bowl of chicken broth to the sofa. The young woman had managed to sit upright, though every movement looked painful. Her hands remained wrapped protectively around her swollen stomach, as if shielding the baby from a world that had already proven far too cruel. "Here," Eleanor said gently, handing her the bowl. "Drink slowly." The woman hesitated. I really shouldn't." "You should," Eleanor replied with a calm smile. "That little one is hungry whether you're willing to admit it or not." For the first time, the young woman allowed herself a tiny, exhausted smile. She carefully lifted the spoon to her lips, and after the first taste, tears unexpectedly welled in her eyes. "I don't even remember the last time someone cooked for me." Eleanor pretended not to notice the tears. Instead, she settled into the old rocking chair across the room. "What should I call you, sweetheart?" There was a long silence, almost as though saying her name meant admitting she still belonged somewhere. "Finally," she whispered. "Maya." "Eleanor," the older woman replied warmly. "It's nice to meet you." "Maya." Another silence settled between them. This one wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two strangers cautiously deciding whether trust was still possible. After several minutes, Eleanor spoke again. "You've been through something terrible." Maya lowered her eyes. "I've been through several terrible things." She stared into the steaming broth. "I guess this is just the latest." Eleanor didn't interrupt. Years of nursing had taught her that hurting people rarely needed advice first. They needed someone willing to listen. "My boyfriend left." The words came quietly, so suddenly that I didn't even have time to understand what was happening. She swallowed hard. "When I told him I was pregnant, he smiled. For just a second. I thought everything would be okay." Her voice broke. But the next day he packed his things. He said he wasn't ready." Another painful laugh escaped her. "Turns out he was ready. God just not with me." Eleanor remained perfectly still. "He went back to his ex. They're expecting a baby, too." The cabin grew painfully quiet. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls. Inside, only the fire answered. I begged him not to leave. Maya continued. "I wasn't asking him to love me. I was only asking him not to abandon his child." She closed her eyes. "He walked away anyway." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. She had seen heartbreak before, but abandonment during pregnancy left wounds few people ever fully understood. "What about your family?" Maya slowly shook her head. "My parents died when I was 16. I've been alone ever since. I thought I had finally built a real home." Another bitter smile crossed her face. "I was wrong." Eleanor stared quietly into the flames. 43 years earlier, another frightened young woman had sat across from her. Another young woman carrying a child. Another daughter desperate for understanding. The memories returned so vividly that Eleanor almost forgot where she was. Sarah. Her beautiful Sarah. She remembered the trembling hands, the frightened eyes, the desperate hope. And she remembered something else. Her own failure. "We have to think about what people will say." Those had been her words. Not words of comfort. Not words of protection. Words of fear. Words she had regretted every single day since. Eleanor slowly looked back toward Maya. Not again. She silently promised herself, "Never again." Maya suddenly spoke. I should leave as soon as the weather clears. Eleanor frowned. Leave? I don't want to become your responsibility. You've already done more than enough. I'll find somewhere. There isn't anywhere, Eleanor answered softly. The roads are closed. The nearest town is almost 30 miles away. And in your condition, she looked directly into Maya's eyes. No. You won't make it. Maya lowered her head. I don't want charity. This isn't charity. Eleanor's voice carried a quiet certainty. This is simply what decent people do. You needed help. I had a warm house, so I opened the door. Maya struggled to hold back fresh tears. You don't even know me. No. Eleanor smiled gently. But I know enough. I know you're exhausted. I know you're carrying a baby. And I know someone once convinced you that you were facing this alone. She leaned forward slightly. They were wrong. The words struck Maya harder than she expected. For weeks, every conversation, every glance, every rejection had told her she was a burden, a mistake, a problem nobody wanted. Yet this woman, a complete stranger, had asked for nothing, expected nothing, demanded nothing, only that she eat, rest, and survive. I can't stay forever. You don't have to, Eleanor answered. But you're staying until you're strong enough. And until that baby arrives safely. Maya looked around the cozy cabin. The handmade quilts hanging on the walls. The neatly stacked books. The framed photographs of smiling faces from another lifetime. This wasn't simply a house. It felt, like peace. Something she hadn't experienced in months. Eleanor stood and walked toward an old cedar chest beneath the window. She carefully lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay dozens of beautifully preserved baby clothes, tiny knitted sweaters, soft blankets, handmade booties, small dresses folded with extraordinary care. Maya stared in disbelief. They're beautiful. They belonged to my daughter, Eleanor replied quietly. And before that, they were mine. She gently picked up a tiny yellow sweater. I've kept them all these years. Maya immediately shook her head. I couldn't possibly use those. They're far too precious. Eleanor smiled. Clothes don't become precious because they're hidden away. They become precious because they're loved. She placed the tiny sweater carefully beside Maya. I think they're ready to hold another baby. For the first time since discovering she was pregnant, Maya allowed herself to imagine something she had stopped believing was possible. A future, a safe place, and maybe, just maybe, a family she never expected to find. But neither woman realized that this growing bond would soon uncover a heartbreaking secret buried for more than 4 decades. A truth that would force Eleanor to confront the greatest regret of her life, and forever change both of their futures. The storm finally loosened its grip a few days later. Sunlight filtered through the towering pine trees for the first time in nearly a week, scattering diamonds across the untouched snow. From the cabin window, Maya watched the world slowly come back to life. Yet inside, she felt strangely reluctant to leave the warmth she had found there. Every morning followed the same comforting rhythm. Before sunrise, Eleanor quietly lit the wood stove, brewed fresh coffee, and prepared a hearty breakfast. She never asked Maya to explain more than she was ready to share. Instead, she offered something far rarer than advice. She offered consistency. For someone whose life had been falling apart piece by piece, that simple routine became its own kind of medicine. One afternoon, while Eleanor kneaded bread dough in the kitchen, Maya wandered around the cabin, admiring photographs that lined the walls. One picture immediately caught her attention. It showed a beautiful teenage girl with bright eyes and a confident smile, wearing a high school graduation gown. Standing beside her were a much younger Eleanor and a tall man with kind features, both smiling proudly. The happiness in the photograph felt almost too perfect. "Was this your daughter?" Eleanor stopped kneading. For several long seconds, she didn't answer. Instead, she carefully wiped the flour from her hands before walking over to the photograph. Her fingers gently brushed across the glass. "Yes, my daughter, Sarah." There was such tenderness in Eleanor's voice that Maya immediately sensed another emotion hiding beneath it. Pain. Deep, unfinished pain. "She's beautiful," Maya whispered. A small smile appeared on Eleanor's face. She was... The past tense landed heavily between them. Maya instantly regretted asking, "I'm sorry." "You don't have to apologize." Eleanor continued staring at the photograph. "I like talking about her. It reminds me she existed." Silence filled the room. Outside, melting snow dripped from the cabin roof. Finally. Eleanor took a slow breath. "Sarah would have been 43 this year." Maya looked at her. "Would have..." Eleanor slowly nodded. "She died." The words were spoken so calmly that they almost sounded unreal. Maya's heart sank. What happened?" For a long moment, Eleanor simply stared into the fire, burning inside the stone fireplace. When she finally spoke again, her voice had become distant, as though every word required her to relive the past. "She was 17, and she became pregnant." Maya froze. She hadn't expected those words. It was 1983. Back then, people didn't see unmarried pregnant girls the way they do now. There was shame, gossip, judgment. We cared far too much about what everyone else thought. Eleanor's eyes slowly filled with tears. We convinced ourselves we were protecting her. So we sent her away. Maya felt an ache forming in her chest. "Where? To stay with my sister. We told everyone she was helping with family business. But that wasn't true." Eleanor swallowed painfully. "The plan was for her to give the baby up for adoption, and then come home, as though nothing had ever happened." The room suddenly felt colder, even though the fire still burned brightly. "What did Sarah want?" Maya asked softly. Eleanor closed her eyes. "She wanted to keep her baby." The confession seemed to steal the air from the room. "She begged us. She cried. She promised she'd work. She said she'd finish school somehow. We didn't listen." Her voice broke for the first time. "We thought we knew better." Maya could barely breathe, because every sentence Eleanor spoke sounded frighteningly familiar. Another young woman. Another unexpected pregnancy. Another future hanging by a thread. "What happened?" Maya whispered. Eleanor gripped the edge of the chair until her knuckles turned white. "She went into labor. There were complications. Severe bleeding. The doctors fought to save her. They couldn't." Tears rolled silently down Eleanor's cheeks. "She died 3 days after giving birth." Maya covered her mouth. "Oh my God." "The baby survived." Eleanor nodded slowly. "A little girl?" "Sarah named her Hope." A sad smile crossed Eleanor's face. "She was adopted by a wonderful family. I've received a Christmas card every year. She's a teacher now. She has children of her own." "So, she's okay?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "She had the life Sarah prayed she'd have." Another long silence settled over the cabin. Finally, Maya moved across the room and gently took Eleanor's trembling hand. "You've blamed yourself all these years." Eleanor gave a tiny nod. "Every day. I wasn't just her mother. I was supposed to protect her. Instead, I worried about neighbors. I worried about church. I worried about gossip." Her voice cracked completely. "I never worried enough about my daughter." Fresh tears streamed down her face. "I let her believe she was something to be hidden. She died thinking I was ashamed of her." Maya's own eyes filled with tears. "No. I wasn't ashamed of her, Eleanor whispered desperately. I was afraid, and fear made me become someone I barely recognize. She stood slowly and walked toward an old bookshelf. Hidden behind several worn novels sat a small leather journal. Its cover was faded from time. Eleanor held it with both hands as though it were made of glass. This was Sarah's diary. I've read it hundreds of times. She carefully opened one page marked with a dried flower. Her voice trembled as she began reading. Mom keeps talking about what people will think. But no one asks what I think. I already love this baby. If it's a girl, I'm going to call her Hope. Eleanor stopped reading. She couldn't continue. The diary slipped slightly in her hands as tears blurred every word on the page. Maya quietly wrapped her arms around the older woman. Neither of them spoke. They simply stood there. Two women from different generations. Connected by heartbreak neither had chosen. After several minutes, Eleanor whispered something so softly Maya almost didn't hear it. The night I found you in the snow, I think Sarah brought you to me. Maya looked into Eleanor's tear-filled eyes. No. She gently squeezed her hand. I think she gave both of us another chance. At that moment, neither woman realized that this heartbreaking confession was only the beginning. Before long, another astonishing truth about Eleanor's past would emerge, one that would completely transform the way Maya saw the woman who had saved her life, and reveal that destiny had been quietly preparing this meeting for decades. The days that followed felt different. Nothing dramatic happened. No unexpected visitors arrived at the cabin. No life-changing phone calls interrupted the quiet mountain mornings. Yet everything had changed. Ever since Eleanor shared the story of Sarah, an invisible wall between the two women had quietly disappeared. They were no longer strangers brought together by a snowstorm. They had become two wounded souls helping each other heal. Each morning, Maya woke to the comforting smell of fresh bread baking in the oven and the gentle crackle of the fire. Eleanor never hovered over her, yet she always seemed to appear exactly when she was needed with a warm cup of tea, another blanket, or simply a reassuring smile. For the first time in months, Maya stopped counting the days as obstacles to survive. She began looking forward to tomorrow. One snowy afternoon, Eleanor opened an old cedar recipe box that had sat untouched on a kitchen shelf for years. The wooden lid creaked softly. Inside were dozens of handwritten recipe cards, their edges yellowed with age. My grandmother started this collection, Eleanor explained, carefully pulling one card after another from the box. Then my mother added to it. Eventually, Sarah began writing her own recipes. Maya gently picked up one of the cards. In faded blue ink, someone had written, "Apple pie." Below the ingredients were tiny handwritten notes. Thomas likes extra cinnamon. Sarah always stole the crust before dinner. Bake this every Thanksgiving. Maya smiled. These aren't just recipes. They're memories. Eleanor nodded. Food has a way of keeping people alive long after they're gone. That afternoon, Eleanor insisted on teaching Maya how to bake bread from scratch. The first attempt was terrible. The dough stuck to Maya's fingers. Flour somehow covered the kitchen table, the floor, and even her face. When she accidentally dropped the entire bowl onto the counter, she burst into embarrassed laughter. I'm hopeless. No, Eleanor chuckled. You're learning. There's a difference. Together they started over. Again, and again. By sunset, 2 golden loaves rested on the cooling rack, filling the cabin with the comforting aroma of fresh bread. Maya looked at them with genuine pride. I made this. You did. Eleanor smiled. And someday, you'll teach your child. The words settled deep inside Maya's heart. For months, she had only imagined surviving childbirth. Now, she was imagining birthdays, family dinners, holiday traditions, a future. That evening, while folding tiny baby clothes beside the fireplace. Maya quietly asked, "Were you always this patient?" Eleanor laughed softly. "Oh, goodness, no. I used to believe everything had to be perfect. The perfect family, the perfect reputation, the perfect future." She shook her head slowly. "Life spent years teaching me that perfection is one of the cruelest lies we ever chase." Maya looked down at the tiny sweater in her hands. "I've spent my whole life trying not to disappoint people. And where did that get you?" Maya thought for a long moment. "Lonely." Eleanor nodded gently. "Exactly." She placed another folded blanket into the nursery basket. "People will always find something to criticize. If you become a mother, they'll say you're too young. If you work, they'll say you neglect your child. If you stay home, they'll say you've wasted your education. If you're strong, they'll call you difficult. If you're gentle, they'll call you weak." She smiled kindly. "So, stop trying to earn everyone's approval. You'll lose yourself before you ever succeed." Maya had never heard anyone say those words. Not her teachers, not her boyfriend, not even herself. For years, she had measured her worth by whether other people accepted her. Now she suddenly understood how exhausting that had been. The following week, Eleanor drove Maya into town for another prenatal appointment. As they walked through the grocery store afterward, Maya noticed several people whispering. She instinctively lowered her eyes. Old fear returned immediately. "They're talking about me." Eleanor continued placing vegetables into the shopping basket. "Probably. Aren't you embarrassed?" Eleanor stopped walking. She turned toward Maya with surprising firmness. "Tell me something. When you nearly froze to death outside my house, did those people come looking for you?" Maya quietly shook her head. "When you were hungry, did they feed you?" "No." "When you cried yourself to sleep, did they hold your hand?" Again. "No." Eleanor smiled. "Then why should their opinions matter more than their actions?" The question echoed inside Maya long after they left the store. That evening she stood outside the cabin watching the sun disappear behind the mountains. The snow reflected shades of pink and gold beneath the fading light. For months she had believed she was broken, unwanted, unlovable. But standing there beside Eleanor, she realized something remarkable. Nothing about her pregnancy had made her less worthy. The people who abandoned her had simply failed to recognize her value. That realization changed everything. Later that night, Maya wandered into the small upstairs room Eleanor had already begun preparing for the baby. A tiny wooden cradle sat beneath the window. Handmade quilts rested neatly inside. Beside it stood the old music box Eleanor had shown her days earlier. Maya gently turned the key. A soft lullaby filled the room. Without realizing it, she placed one hand on her belly. The baby kicked gently. She smiled through unexpected tears. "We're going to be okay." For the very first time, she believed those words. Downstairs, Eleanor watched quietly from the doorway. Months earlier, she would have seen a frightened young woman overwhelmed by uncertainty. Now she saw something entirely different. She saw a mother, not because the baby had been born, but because courage had quietly replaced fear. Hope had begun replacing shame. Confidence had begun replacing doubt. Eleanor suddenly understood something she had spent 43 years searching for. She could never change Sarah's story. But perhaps she could help ensure that another young mother's story ended differently. And maybe, just maybe, that was the forgiveness she had been waiting for all along. Neither woman realized that the greatest test of their growing bond was still ahead. Before spring arrived, a sudden medical emergency would force Eleanor to confront the profession she had abandoned decades earlier, and in doing so, she would discover that some callings never truly disappear, no matter how deeply they are buried. By the time March arrived, winter no longer felt as merciless as it once had. The snow still covered the mountains, but the days had grown longer. Sunlight lingered across the valley each afternoon, and tiny streams of melted ice trickled beneath the frozen ground, whispering that spring was finally on its way. Inside the cabin, something else was beginning to bloom. Hope. Every morning, Eleanor and Maya settled into a comfortable routine that felt increasingly like family life. After breakfast, they spent hours preparing for the baby's arrival. Some days they organized the tiny clothes stored inside Eleanor's cedar chest. Other days they painted the small upstairs bedroom in soft cream colors while cheerful music played quietly from an old radio. Neither of them said it aloud, but every brush stroke felt like painting over the darkness that had once surrounded both their lives. One afternoon, Eleanor carried a beautifully carved wooden cradle into the nursery. Its polished oak shimmered in the afternoon sunlight. "My husband built this before Sarah was born," Eleanor said softly, running her fingertips across the delicate carvings of flowers and birds. "He spent nearly 3 months making it." Maya admired the craftsmanship. "It's beautiful. He believed every child deserved something made with love." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I couldn't bear to let anyone else use it after Sarah died." She paused before looking at Maya. "But I think it's been waiting for your baby." Maya's eyes immediately filled with tears. "Eleanor, I can't keep accepting things that mean so much to you." Eleanor gently placed a hand on the cradle. "They only have meaning if they're used. For years, I thought preserving these memories meant locking them away." She shook her head. "I was wrong. Love isn't honored by hiding it. It's honored by sharing it." Together they carefully arranged soft blankets inside the cradle. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. They simply imagined the tiny life that would soon sleep there. Later that week, Eleanor drove Maya to another prenatal appointment with Dr. Harrison. After completing the examination, the doctor smiled reassuringly. "The baby's heartbeat is excellent. Growth is exactly where it should be." He looked over Maya's latest test results. "Physically, everything looks very good." Then his expression softened. "I have to say, I've rarely seen such a remarkable improvement in a mother's emotional health." Maya looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "When you first came here, your blood pressure was dangerously high. You were exhausted, constantly anxious. Your body was carrying far more stress than pregnancy alone should cause." He glanced toward Eleanor. "Today, you're smiling. Your blood pressure is normal. And your baby is responding beautifully." He closed the medical chart. "Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it." As they left the clinic, Maya slipped her arm through Eleanor's. "You know, you probably saved both of us." Eleanor smiled gently. "I simply opened my door." "No." Maya shook her head. "You gave me something much bigger. You gave me permission to believe I could still become the mother my baby deserves." Those words stayed with Eleanor throughout the drive home. That evening, while searching the attic for more baby blankets, Maya discovered an old wooden trunk tucked beneath the rafters. Curiosity led her to brush away decades of dust before lifting the heavy lid. Inside were neatly folded nursing uniforms, medical textbooks, leather journals, and dozens of faded photographs. One picture immediately caught her attention. A much younger Eleanor stood in a hospital delivery room, smiling proudly while holding a newborn baby wrapped in a white blanket. Another photograph showed Eleanor surrounded by grateful parents, each holding infants she had helped deliver. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. Maya carried the photographs downstairs. "Eleanor, what are these?" The older woman's face changed instantly. For several seconds, she simply stared at the pictures. "I thought I'd packed those away forever." Maya looked closer. Every photograph showed Eleanor with another newborn child. "Were these your patients?" Eleanor slowly nodded. "For many years." "You never told me." "I didn't think it mattered anymore." Maya carefully picked up one framed certificate lying at the bottom of the box. Her eyes widened. Certified nurse midwife. Issued more than 40 years earlier. She looked back at Eleanor in complete disbelief. You weren't just a nurse. You were a midwife. Eleanor quietly lowered herself into the rocking chair. Yes, for 15 years. Before Sarah. The room fell silent. Maya suddenly understood everything. The calm confidence. The gentle examinations. The effortless way Eleanor monitored every stage of her pregnancy. The emergency the night they rushed to the hospital. The endless knowledge that seemed almost instinctive. You've delivered babies. Eleanor smiled sadly. A few. How many? She looked toward the fireplace. I stopped counting after 200. Maya stared at her. You helped bring more than 200 children into the world. 237. The number escaped Eleanor without hesitation. She had remembered every single one. I loved every birth, she whispered. Every cry, every first breath. It was the greatest privilege of my life. Maya slowly sat beside her. Then why did you stop? Eleanor closed her eyes. Because every baby I delivered reminded me of the one I couldn't save. The one whose mother was my own daughter? I couldn't separate the two anymore. So, I walked away. For the first time since they had met, Maya felt something unexpected. Not pity, admiration. She realized the quiet woman who had rescued her wasn't simply kind. She had once been extraordinary. Someone trusted with the most sacred moments in countless families' lives. Someone who had sacrificed her calling because grief convinced her she no longer deserved it. Maya reached across and gently took Eleanor's hand. I don't believe you stopped being a midwife. Eleanor looked at her. I think you simply stopped believing in yourself. Those words settled deep inside Eleanor's heart. For 43 years, she had viewed herself as a woman defined by one tragic mistake. Yet sitting beside Maya, watching the young mother laugh again, watching life slowly return to the cabin, she felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Purpose. Not the purpose of fixing the past. That would never be possible. But the purpose of protecting the future. As the fire crackled softly beside them, neither woman realized that the greatest moment of Eleanor's life was drawing closer with every passing day. Soon, an unexpected emergency would leave no time for fear or regret, and the woman who believed her calling had ended decades ago would once again be asked to welcome a new life into the world. The final weeks of Maya's pregnancy arrived with an unexpected sense of peace. The fear that had once followed her every waking moment had slowly disappeared, replaced by quiet confidence. She no longer looked at herself as a frightened young woman, abandoned by the person she trusted most. Now, when she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror, she saw something entirely different. She saw a mother, not a perfect one, but a brave one. Every evening, she sat beside the nursery window, gently rubbing her growing belly while speaking softly to the little girl inside. I can't promise life will always be easy, she whispered one night. But I can promise you'll never wonder if you're loved. Downstairs, Eleanor heard every word. A smile spread across her face. Months earlier, Maya could barely imagine surviving another day. Now she was already planning a lifetime of memories with her daughter. The transformation was remarkable. One crisp morning, Maya noticed Eleanor standing quietly on the front porch, watching the sunrise over the mountains. The older woman seemed unusually thoughtful. What are you thinking about? Eleanor smiled without taking her eyes off the horizon. I was remembering the first time I stood here after Sarah died. Maya waited silently. I hated this view, Eleanor admitted. I hated the mountains. I hated the silence. I hated waking up every morning. Her voice remained calm, but the pain behind it was unmistakable. I convinced myself this cabin had become a prison. She looked toward Maya. But it wasn't the cabin. It was my guilt. For years, Eleanor had believed she deserved to suffer. Every empty room reminded her of Sarah. Every birthday reminded her of the granddaughter she had never watched grow up. Every Christmas card from Hope reminded her of the life that might have been. Instead of healing, she simply survived until one snowy morning changed everything. "You know something?" Eleanor asked softly. "When I found you lying in the snow, I thought I was saving your life." She paused before gently shaking her head. "I was wrong." Maya looked at her with confusion. "You saved mine." The words hung in the cold morning air. "For 43 years, Eleanor continued, I believed my story had already ended. I thought the best part of my life was behind me. I thought my purpose had died with Sarah." A tear rolled slowly down her cheek. "But then you arrived. You gave me another chance to become the woman I should have been all those years ago." Maya embraced her tightly. Neither woman needed to say another word. Some truths were too powerful for conversation. They simply had to be felt. A few days later, Maya insisted on accompanying Eleanor into town, despite her growing discomfort. "I need to buy one last thing before the baby comes." They wandered through a small children's bookstore, where Maya picked up a collection of bedtime stories. As she carried them toward the register, she noticed Eleanor quietly purchasing something of her own. On the drive home, Maya finally asked, "What did you buy?" Eleanor smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." That evening, after dinner, Eleanor handed Maya a small wrapped package. Inside was a worn leather journal. Its pages were completely blank. Maya looked puzzled. "It's beautiful. What is it for?" Eleanor gently rested her hand on the cover. "I've spent 43 years wishing I could read new chapters in Sarah's life. I'll never have that opportunity." She smiled warmly. "But your daughter deserves a different story. I want you to fill these pages. The first smile, the first word, the first day of school, the silly moments, the difficult ones, the ordinary days you'll someday miss." Maya slowly turned the blank pages. There were hundreds of them. "So that one day," Eleanor continued, "why is more all nights? When she's grown, she'll know exactly how deeply she was loved." Tears blurred Maya's vision. "No one has ever given me something so meaningful." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Oh, sweetheart, the memories you haven't made yet are often the most valuable gift of all." Later that night, Maya sat alone in the nursery. She opened the journal. For several minutes, she simply stared at the empty first page. Then she began writing. "Dear little one, you don't know this yet, but before you were even born, you changed 2 lives." She continued writing until midnight. About the snowstorm, the cabin, the warmth of Eleanor's kindness, the day Hope returned. When she finally closed the journal, she realized something extraordinary. She wasn't writing out of fear anymore. She was writing with excitement for the future. The next morning brought another surprise. As Maya slowly made her way downstairs, she found Eleanor sorting through several cardboard boxes in the living room. "What are those?" "Donations." "From who?" "The town." Inside were diapers, baby clothes, blankets, books, handmade toys, even a beautifully knitted sweater with a small handwritten note attached. Every baby deserves to feel welcome. Maya covered her mouth. "They did all this for us?" Eleanor nodded. "People have been dropping things off all week." "They wanted to help." Maya looked around the room in disbelief. Months ago, she had believed she was completely alone. Now, an entire community was quietly preparing for her daughter's arrival. The loneliness she once carried had disappeared so gradually that she hadn't even noticed it leaving. That afternoon, as they folded tiny clothes together, Maya suddenly laughed. "What?" Eleanor asked. "I just realized something." "What?" "I don't think of this as your cabin anymore." She looked around the cozy living room. It feels like home. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears once again. It hasn't felt like home in a very long time. She reached over and squeezed Maya's hand. But now, it finally does. Outside, the first signs of spring were beginning to appear beneath the melting snow. Tiny green shoots pushed through the frozen earth, proving that even the harshest winter could not stop new life from finding its way into the light. Inside the cabin, two women who had once been defined by loss had become stronger because of each other. One had discovered the courage to become a mother. The other had finally forgiven herself enough to become a grandmother. Neither of them realized that the moment they had been preparing for was only hours away. Before another sunrise, labor would begin, and Eleanor would face the greatest test of her life, one that would determine not only the future of Maya and her baby, but whether she could truly leave the pain of the past behind forever. Before dawn, Maya woke to a sharp pain that wrapped around her lower back and tightened across her stomach. At first, she lay perfectly still, hoping it would pass. It didn't. A few minutes later, another contraction came stronger, longer, impossible to ignore. She gently placed both hands over her belly. "This is it," she whispered. Eleanor. Within seconds, Eleanor was at her bedroom door. Despite the early hour, she was already dressed. Years may have passed since she had delivered her last baby, but something inside her had awakened the moment she heard Maya's voice. "Tell me what you're feeling," Eleanor said calmly. "The contractions, they're coming every few minutes." Eleanor quietly checked Maya's pulse before timing another contraction with her watch. A calm smile appeared on her face. "I think someone is ready to meet the world." Although her voice remained steady, her heart was racing. 43 years. 43 years since she had last welcomed a child into the world. 43 years since grief had convinced her she would never again deserve to do what she loved most. Yet now, life had brought another frightened young mother to her door. Only this time, she refused to let history repeat itself. The cabin had already been prepared weeks earlier. Clean linens covered the bed. Sterilized instruments rested neatly inside Eleanor's leather medical bag. Warm towels waited beside the fireplace. Every detail reflected decades of experience that grief had hidden but never erased. As the morning sunlight slowly filled the room, Maya's labor became more intense. Each contraction demanded every ounce of her strength. "I'm scared," Maya whispered between heavy breaths. Eleanor gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. "I know, but you're stronger than you realize. And you're not alone." Those 4 words became Maya's anchor. Every time fear threatened to overwhelm her, she looked into Eleanor's calm gray eyes and remembered them. "You're not alone." Hour after hour passed. The contractions grew closer. The room remained quiet except for Maya's breathing and Eleanor's steady voice guiding her through each moment. Finally, Eleanor examined her one more time. A smile spread slowly across her face. "It's time." Maya nodded, gripping Eleanor's hand with surprising strength. "I don't think I can do this." Eleanor looked directly into her eyes. "Yes, you can, because mothers have been finding this strength long before they believed they possessed it. Trust yourself. Trust your baby. And trust me." With renewed determination, Maya pushed again. Then again, one final time. The room suddenly filled with the unmistakable cry of a newborn. Clear. Strong. Beautiful. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the world outside seemed to fall silent. Tears immediately blurred Eleanor's vision. She gently lifted the tiny baby into her hands. A healthy little girl. Her tiny fingers stretched into the air. Her lungs announced her arrival with remarkable determination. Eleanor laughed through her tears. "She's perfect." She carefully wrapped the baby in one of the handmade blankets waiting beside the bed before placing her gently into Maya's trembling arms. The young mother looked down at the little face she had dreamed about for months. Everything else disappeared. The fear, the loneliness, the heartbreak. None of it mattered anymore. "Hello, my beautiful girl. I'm your mommy." The baby opened her eyes for just a moment. Maya smiled through tears. "I've been waiting for you." Across the room, Eleanor quietly wiped her face. She had delivered hundreds of babies during her career, yet none of those moments compared to this one. Because today, she wasn't simply delivering a child. She was finally healing a wound that had remained open for more than 4 decades. A few hours later, as mother and daughter rested peacefully, Maya looked toward Eleanor. "I've chosen her name?" Eleanor smiled. "What is it?" "Hope." The older woman's breath caught. The room fell completely silent. "My daughter wanted to give that name to her own baby." "I know," Maya answered softly. "I read it in her diary. I think... She'd want this little girl to carry that hope forward. Unable to speak, Eleanor simply nodded. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. For the first time in 43 years, the name no longer reminded her only of loss. Now it represented healing, new beginnings, a promise fulfilled. Over the following weeks, the tiny cabin became filled with laughter instead of silence. Hope's gentle cries echoed through the rooms that had once held only memories. The wooden cradle Thomas had lovingly built decades earlier finally rocked another child to sleep. Sarah's tiny knitted sweaters were worn exactly as they had always been meant to be. Nothing remained locked away inside cedar chests anymore. Everything had become part of a new family story. News of the baby's birth quickly spread throughout the mountain town. One by one, neighbors arrived carrying homemade quilts, fresh bread, flowers, children's books, and tiny handmade toys. People who had once whispered now smiled with genuine warmth. The same community that had once judged had finally learned something far more valuable than gossip: compassion. A few weeks later, as Eleanor sat on the porch holding baby Hope while watching the spring sunshine melt the last patches of snow, Maya quietly joined her. Neither woman spoke for several minutes. They simply admired the peaceful valley stretching before them. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder why I ended up outside your cabin that morning?" Eleanor looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, then toward the mountains glowing beneath the afternoon sun. "I used to believe life was nothing more than a series of accidents." She smiled gently. "I don't believe that anymore. I think sometimes Sekdongtorisan is strong." God sends people into our lives exactly when we're both ready to save each other. Maya reached over and gently squeezed Eleanor's hand. "You didn't just save my life. You gave my daughter a future." Eleanor looked at little Hope sleeping peacefully against her chest. A smile filled with quiet gratitude spread across her face. "No, sweetheart. You and Hope gave me mine." And in that peaceful mountain cabin, where a lonely widow had once believed her story had ended, 3 generations of love quietly proved a timeless truth. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't happen because the past can be changed. They happen because someone chooses to love deeply enough to create a better future. Every life leaves behind a story. Some stories are written through success. Others are written through heartbreak. But the stories that stay with us the longest are often the ones that remind us how powerful a single act of kindness can be. Eleanor spent more than 40 years believing one mistake had defined the rest of her life. She carried the weight of regret every single day, convinced that nothing could ever erase the pain of losing her daughter. Maya believed she had reached the end of her journey, abandoned, homeless, and pregnant. She saw no future waiting for her beyond loneliness and uncertainty. Neither woman expected that everything would change because of one simple decision. A door opened. A warm meal was shared. A stranger was treated like family. Sometimes we imagine that changing someone's life requires extraordinary wealth, influence, or power. The truth is much simpler. Sometimes all it takes is choosing compassion instead of judgment, choosing understanding instead of criticism, choosing to stand beside someone when the rest of the world walks away. Perhaps the greatest lesson in this story is that our past does not have to become our future. We cannot rewrite yesterday. We cannot undo painful decisions or erase the moments we wish had gone differently. But every new day gives us another opportunity to choose differently, another opportunity to forgive, another opportunity to love, another opportunity to become the person we wish we had been. Eleanor could never bring Sarah back, but she honored her daughter's memory by making sure another young mother never felt ashamed or abandoned. Maya could never change the people who had walked away from her, but she chose not to let their rejection define the kind of mother she would become. That is how healing begins. Not by forgetting the past, but by allowing our pain to become someone else's hope. Perhaps, somewhere in your own life, there is someone quietly carrying a burden you cannot see. A neighbor, a friend, a family member, or even a complete stranger. You may never realize how much your kindness means to them. One encouraging conversation, one helping hand, one moment of compassion may become the turning point they remember for the rest of their lives. And perhaps one day, years from now, they will tell someone else about the person who refused to give up on them. Maybe that person will be you. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment when one person's kindness completely changed your life? Or have you ever been given a second chance when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next inspiring story. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, remember this: kindness is never wasted. The love we give today often becomes the hope that carries someone else through tomorrow.